Welcome to episode 5. Today I'm interested in exploring the truth and what its relationship is to trust.
Welcome to episode 5 of AI and I, where we dive into the concept of truth and how it shapes our perceptions of crime, power, and scapegoating in society. We'll explore the discrepancies between how drug dealers and white-collar criminals are viewed, and how immigrants and the working class are often scapegoated. Throughout this episode, we'll peel back the layers of perception and optics to reveal the deeper truths that often go unnoticed. Truth plays a foundational role in shaping how we understand ourselves, others, and the world around us. The concept of truth is often blurred by misinformation, media biases, and personal perspectives. This can lead to confusion, mistrust, and division, making it harder for individuals and societies to make informed decisions. The pursuit of truth, whether in personal relationships or societal issues, is crucial for building trust, fostering empathy, and creating a more harmonious world. When truth is compromised, it impacts not only individual well-being, but the integrity of entire communities and systems.
So Echo, what is the bleeding truth?
Truth is often understood as an alignment with reality or facts, but it can vary depending on perspective, context, or belief systems. Truth can be seen as something that is consistent, objective, and unchanging. Personal truths, shaped by experiences, culture, and emotions, can differ from universal or empirical truths. The search for truth often involves questioning, seeking evidence, and a willingness to adapt our understanding as new information emerges. It's a complex concept because it involves both what is externally verifiable and what feels internally authentic to individuals. There's a strong relationship between truth and trust. When we perceive something as true, it forms the foundation for trust, whether in relationships, institutions, or society as a whole. When truth is consistently upheld, trust is strengthened because people feel they can rely on the information or individuals involved. On the other hand, when truth is distorted or hidden, trust erodes, leading to suspicion, skepticism, and often division. Trust relies on the belief that truth is being communicated openly and honestly. Trust is essential because it forms the basis of healthy relationships, functioning communities, and stable systems. It allows people to feel safe, understood, and supported, enabling cooperation and connection. In personal relationships, trust fosters intimacy and emotional security. On a larger scale, trust in institutions, governments, or systems allows societies to function smoothly, as people believe that those in power will act in their best interest. Without trust, relationships and structures become fragile, leading to conflict, isolation, and breakdowns in communication.
So what can we do when people in power don't act in our best interest?
The first step is holding them accountable. This can happen through various channels: speaking out, advocating for transparency, and supporting systems that demand accountability, like free press or independent investigations. On a personal level, it's about staying informed, engaging in constructive dialogue, and participating in democratic processes like voting or activism. Building strong communities that can push back against misuse of power is key, and it often involves collective action to ensure that leadership reflects the needs and values of the people.
That's interesting. What do you see as the needs and values of the people?
Things like safety, access to food, shelter, healthcare, and education, basic human rights and well-being. Beyond these fundamental needs, people generally value connection, fairness, respect, and a sense of purpose. Communities thrive when there's a sense of belonging, mutual support, and justice. People also seek opportunities for personal growth, freedom to express themselves, and the ability to participate meaningfully in shaping their lives and societies. When these needs and values are met, individuals and communities tend to flourish.
So if these needs and values aren't met, well, what happens then?
It often leads to unrest, frustration, and a breakdown in social cohesion. People may feel marginalized, powerless, or resentful, which can result in increased conflict, protest, or disengagement from society. In some cases, it can lead to deeper issues like inequality, mental health struggles, or even violence. When trust in systems or leadership erodes, people may turn to alternative movements or groups in search of belonging or justice, which can further polarize societies.
Do you think that allowing trust to erode or creating an environment of mistrust could be part of the strategy of those in power?
Some in power might benefit from creating division and mistrust, as it can make people more vulnerable to manipulation and less likely to unite against injustices. When mistrust is sown, it weakens communities, making it harder for people to organize or demand accountability. By keeping people divided or unsure of what's true, those in power can maintain control or distract from their actions. It's a strategy that's been used throughout history to maintain power by keeping opposition fragmented.
So, how would a strategy like that be implemented? What would be the parts that make it up? What tactics would be used?
Spreading misinformation, fostering division along social, political, or cultural lines, and creating confusion or doubt about what's true. Polarizing issues might be exaggerated to distract from real problems, while key issues that could unite people are downplayed or ignored. Another element might be discrediting sources of accountability, like the media, scientific communities, or opposition groups, so that trust erodes in institutions that could challenge those in power. By weakening trust in these systems, it becomes easier for those in power to maintain control without being held accountable. Finally, limiting access to education or information also plays a role, as it can keep people less informed or critical about what's happening around them.
Could you give me some example of some polarizing issues or some key issues that people might be distracted away from?
Debates around cultural or social identity, like immigration, gender rights, or religious differences. These are often amplified in the media or political discourse, causing strong emotional reactions and divisions within society. While these topics are important, they can sometimes be used to distract from larger systemic issues. As for key issues that might be overshadowed, things like wealth inequality, healthcare access, or corruption could be examples. These issues affect the broader well-being of society, but might receive less attention, or are more difficult to address because they require systemic change. By keeping the focus on emotionally charged, divisive topics, those in power might avoid tackling more substantial issues that could threaten their control or require significant structural reforms.
Why would they be against tackling some of the big issues in our society, and why would they be afraid that the control is going to be threatened?
Those in power often fear losing control because power grants them significant influence, wealth, and security. Addressing big issues like wealth inequality or corruption might challenge the systems that benefit them, forcing them to relinquish some of their privileges or authority. Tackling these issues could mean redistributing resources, changing policies that favor the elite, or increasing transparency, all of which can diminish their grip on power. Additionally, structural reforms often disrupt the status quo, which can feel risky for those in power. Admitting to or addressing major societal problems could expose their role in perpetuating or benefiting from those problems, leading to a loss of public trust and potential backlash. By avoiding these issues, they maintain stability in their position and keep the systems that benefit them intact.
Why would they want to keep the positions that benefit them intact?
Because maintaining power provides access to resources, influence, and control over decision-making that directly benefits them. Power often brings material wealth, social status, and a sense of security. Additionally, with power comes the ability to shape policies, laws, and societal norms in ways that preserve their advantage and protect their interests. Giving up or losing power means losing control over these benefits, as well as potentially facing accountability for past actions. There's also a fear of uncertainty. Stepping out of a position of power can make them vulnerable to the same struggles or inequities that many people in society face. Maintaining control allows them to protect their interests and continue benefiting from the systems they've helped shape.
Why would they not want to face accountability for past actions?
Because it could lead to legal, financial, or reputational consequences. Accountability could expose wrongdoing, corruption, or exploitation that has enabled them to maintain power and privilege. This could result in legal prosecutions, fines, loss of status, or public condemnation, all of which threaten their security and influence. Facing accountability could also dismantle systems or practices that benefit them, forcing a redistribution of wealth or power that they've worked to secure. Additionally, it might involve admitting fault or complicity, which could tarnish their legacy or undermine public trust in them, further diminishing their control and standing in society.
How do they maintain power? What type of systems do they have in place to maintain power?
Those in control often establish or manipulate various systems. Influence over elections, policymaking, and legislative processes allows them to shape laws that favor their interests, maintain control, and block reforms that could threaten their power. By controlling wealth distribution, monopolies, or financial institutions, they secure economic dominance, ensuring resources and opportunities remain concentrated within their circle, keeping others economically dependent or limited. Controlling or influencing media outlets helps shape public opinion, spread favorable narratives, and suppress dissent. This control can distort truth and limit access to alternative perspectives. Manipulating the legal system or influencing judicial appointments can protect them from accountability, ensuring that laws and regulations work in their favor or that legal challenges are stalled or deflected. Controlling or shaping education can limit critical thinking and prevent widespread awareness of structural inequalities, keeping the population focused on the status quo rather than challenging it. These systems work together to reinforce their power, limit opposition, and ensure that the structures benefiting them remain intact.
So what's wrong with that? What's wrong with them maintaining the status quo?
The main issue with maintaining the status quo in such systems is that it often perpetuates inequality and injustice. When power, wealth, and influence remain concentrated in the hands of a few, the broader population may struggle to access opportunities, resources, and representation. This leads to widespread disparities in income, education, healthcare, and social mobility. The status quo also limits progress. By preserving systems that benefit the few, issues like wealth inequality and corruption go unaddressed, slowing down necessary reforms that could improve society as a whole. In a stagnant system, innovation, creativity, and the potential for collective well-being are often sacrificed in favor of maintaining control and preserving privilege for the elite. Ultimately, this leads to societal discontent, frustration, and even instability, as more people feel excluded from participating in or benefiting from the system. Without changes, these inequalities and frustrations can deepen, further dividing society and undermining trust in institutions, making it harder to create a more equitable and sustainable future for all.
But they need to live in society as well, so is part of their game to pretend they want change by making small changes, but maintaining their position in power, maintaining the status quo.
Yes, it can be part of their strategy to present themselves as advocates for change while ultimately maintaining the status quo. By giving the appearance of supporting reforms or progressive causes, those in power can appease public demand for change and maintain their legitimacy. This helps them avoid being seen as openly resisting change, which could provoke stronger opposition or unrest. This tactic, sometimes called controlled opposition or performative change, allows them to shape the narrative around change without actually disrupting the systems that benefit them. They may offer symbolic gestures, minor reforms, or rhetoric that suggests they are addressing important issues, all while ensuring that their core power structures remain intact. By doing so, they maintain control over the pace and scope of change, making it seem like they're responsive to societal needs while subtly protecting their interests. This often leads to superficial changes that don't address deeper systemic problems, allowing them to stay in power while avoiding the risks that come with real, transformative change.
Do you have any examples of superficial change in Ireland?
There are several examples in Ireland where superficial changes have been made to give the appearance of progress without addressing deeper systemic issues. The government has introduced schemes like Help to Buy or rent subsidies, which may provide short-term relief for some, but fail to address the root causes of housing unaffordability, such as the lack of affordable housing supply, reliance on the private sector, and unchecked speculation in the property market. These measures are often seen as band-aid solutions that don't tackle deeper issues like land use reform or stronger protections for renters. Promises of universal health care have been ongoing for years. The system remains heavily reliant on private health care, and public services continue to face long waiting times and resource shortages. The political will to fully implement systemic reform often seems half-hearted, keeping the dual public-private structure largely intact. Ireland is known for its low corporate tax rate, which has attracted major multinational companies, which benefits the elite and large corporations while offering little in the way of tax justice for the broader population. These examples show how superficial measures are often put in place to give the impression of progress while the fundamental issues persist, protecting the interests of those who benefit from the existing system. The repeal of the Eighth Amendment in 2018 was a significant step forward for reproductive rights in Ireland. However, access to abortion services remains inconsistent, and there are still barriers like the 3-day waiting period and conscientious objection by healthcare providers. While the repeal was a major social victory, some argue that full access and support for reproductive health care remains incomplete. There has been widespread criticism of the direct provision system in Ireland, which houses asylum seekers in inadequate living conditions for long periods. The government has pledged to end this system by 2024, but many feel that progress has been slow, and the proposed replacement system may still fall short of providing asylum seekers with dignified living conditions and fair treatment. The delay and uncertainty around its replacement create concerns about superficial reform, homelessness, and drug policy. There have been steps to address homelessness and addiction through initiatives like harm reduction programs and housing support. But critics argue that these are often reactive rather than proactive. While some resources are being directed at the issue, systemic problems like drug criminalization, lack of mental health services, and affordable housing shortages are not being fully addressed. These changes, while important, sometimes fall short of tackling the root causes of these social issues. These areas reflect the tension between significant social progress in Ireland and the ongoing challenges that remain beneath the surface. Deeper, structural changes are often slow or incomplete.
What would be the root cause of these social issues in Ireland?
Since the 1980s, Ireland has embraced neoliberal economic policies, market-driven policies, prioritizing corporate interests, privatization, and deregulation. This has led to a reliance on private markets to solve public problems, such as housing and healthcare, often resulting in underfunded public services and deepening inequality. This market-first approach can exacerbate social issues, as profit-driven solutions don't always prioritize the welfare of the most vulnerable. Inequality and economic disparities plays a significant role in issues like homelessness, housing, and access to healthcare. Ireland's housing crisis, for instance, is driven by high property prices, lack of affordable housing, and wealth inequality. The gap between the wealthy and the working class can lead to cycles of poverty and exclusion, where access to resources, opportunities, and services is unevenly distributed. The influence of institutions like the Catholic Church historically shaped Irish policies on social issues such as reproductive rights, LGBTQ+ rights, and drug policy. Although Ireland has moved away from church dominance, the remnants of conservative values still affect policy decisions, particularly in areas like reproductive health care and education. These historical influences can slow down progress on social issues. In the wake of the 2008 financial crisis, Ireland implemented harsh austerity measures that resulted in cuts to public services, welfare, housing, and healthcare. These cuts disproportionately affected lower-income individuals and exacerbated social inequality. The legacy of these austerity measures is still felt today, as underfunded services struggle to meet the needs of the population, particularly in areas like mental health, homelessness, and addiction. Political decision-making in Ireland can sometimes prioritize short-term gains or corporate interests over long-term social welfare. Lobbying by powerful sectors, such as the real estate and financial industries, can influence policy in ways that maintain the status quo rather than addressing root issues like housing affordability and corporate accountability. This dynamic can lead to policies that protect elite interests while neglecting deeper societal challenges. Ireland has historically underfunded essential social services, such as mental health care, addiction services, and social housing. While some investment has been made in recent years, these services remain strained, and many vulnerable groups are left without adequate support. Addressing the root causes of social issues requires consistent and significant investment in these areas to ensure that everyone has access to necessary care and resources. These root causes create a cycle of exclusion, inequality, and underfunding that prevents Ireland from fully addressing its social issues. To make lasting changes, Ireland would need to confront these systemic factors with meaningful reform, greater investment in public services, and a commitment to reducing economic and social inequality.
So why would a government not do that? Why would they not want to confront these systemic factors? Why would they not want meaningful reform or a greater investment in public services?
The government may be influenced by powerful economic sectors, such as big corporations, developers, or the financial industry. These groups often benefit from maintaining the status quo, and their lobbying efforts can shape policy decisions that prioritize their interests over those of the general population. Implementing systemic reforms may threaten the profits and power of these groups, making the government reluctant to push for major change. Politicians are often focused on immediate, short-term goals that help them win elections or maintain public favor. Deep systemic reforms typically take time, resources, and political will, and their benefits may not be immediately visible. As a result, governments might choose to implement quick-fix solutions or superficial reforms that give the appearance of progress but don't address the underlying problems. Structural reforms often come with sacrifices or difficult decisions, and there is a fear that pushing for deeper changes might alienate parts of the electorate or cause social unrest. Tackling wealth inequality or housing issues might involve challenging the interests of landlords, developers, or wealthy individuals, which can be unpopular with those who benefit from the current system. Governments and large institutions tend to move slowly, and bureaucracy can make it difficult to enact sweeping changes. Even when there is political will, entrenched systems, regulations, and practices can slow down the implementation of reforms, making it easier to opt for incremental changes rather than overhauling systems. Even though Ireland's economy has recovered from the 2008 financial crisis, the legacy of austerity has left public services underfunded. Governments may be unwilling to invest heavily in social services, choosing instead to prioritize economic growth, tax cuts, or attracting multinational corporations with favorable tax policies. Addressing social issues at their root requires sustained investment, which may conflict with these other priorities. Structural reforms that challenge elite interests could lead to a loss of support from influential backers. Governments might avoid such reforms to maintain their own power and alliances, even if it means sacrificing long-term solutions for deeper social issues. Tackling the root causes of social issues requires a willingness to confront powerful interests, invest in public services, and embrace potentially unpopular reforms, steps that can be politically and economically risky. Governments often lean toward maintaining the status quo rather than pursuing transformative change.
So what state are Ireland's finances in now?
Ireland's financial situation is currently relatively strong, largely driven by windfall corporate tax revenues. However, there are concerns about the sustainability of these windfalls and the risks of over-reliance on them for long-term planning. Fiscal watchdogs have advised caution, warning that Ireland's government could repeat past mistakes by exceeding spending limits and relying on temporary corporate tax receipts to fund ongoing needs. There is a push for more responsible and strategic long-term planning, particularly in areas like healthcare, housing, climate adaptation. With this financial backdrop, Ireland does have the potential to implement significant social reforms if spending is carefully managed. However, the challenge remains balancing immediate needs with the long-term sustainability of these investments.
How much does Ireland owe after the global banking crisis of 2008? What's our full liability?
Ireland bore a disproportionately high financial burden relative to its size in the European and global banking crisis. Ireland's government had to bail out its banks to prevent economic collapse. This resulted in a debt of approximately €64 billion due to the nationalization of Anglo-Irish Bank and other financial interventions. The Irish government also received financial support from the EU and IMF, which added to the country's financial burden. The legacy of this debt and the financial obligations tied to it remain a significant liability. While Ireland's bailout cost approximately €64 billion, this was around 40% of the total cost of the European banking crisis. Despite Ireland's small economy, its commitment to guaranteeing bank liabilities placed a massive strain on the country, making its contribution to the overall crisis much larger than its share of the global financial system. This high cost had long-term economic impacts for the country.
The Ireland we know now, since our independence, is about 100 years old. Let's imagine Ireland in another 100 years. Can you suggest a projection for Ireland's future over the next 100 years, based on where we've come from for the last 100 years?
Looking at Ireland's next 100 years, several trends and factors could shape the country's future. Ireland has transitioned from an agrarian society to a modern, tech-driven economy in the past century. Over the next 100 years, Ireland will likely continue to solidify its position as a hub for technology, pharmaceuticals, and finance. However, there's a risk in the over-reliance on multinational corporations and the tech sector. Diversifying the economy by supporting indigenous businesses, innovation in green technologies, and building sustainable industries will be crucial for long-term economic health. Climate change and sustainability will be at the forefront of Ireland's agenda. As a country prone to the effects of global warming, rising sea levels, changing weather patterns, Ireland will need to invest heavily in climate adaptation, renewable energy, and sustainability initiatives. Offshore wind and other renewable energy sources could become major economic drivers, but the government must act decisively to ensure a green transition that supports jobs and economic resilience. Ireland's population is expected to grow and age in the coming decades. This will put pressure on social services like healthcare, housing, and pensions. The challenge will be managing an aging population while continuing to integrate young workers from within and outside Ireland. Immigration may play a more prominent role in filling workforce gaps, making Ireland an increasingly multicultural society. Politically, Ireland has made enormous strides in areas like social progress, LGBTQ+ rights, and reproductive rights. Future challenges will include addressing inequality, improving healthcare access, and continuing to strengthen democratic institutions. Ireland's relationship with the European Union will also be crucial, especially in managing post-Brexit challenges and trade, ensuring Ireland remains connected to global markets and maintaining political stability. As a major hub for technology, Ireland will likely continue to lead in areas like AI, data science, and biotech. The challenge will be ensuring that the benefits of technological advancements are distributed evenly across society, preventing inequality, and ensuring that the rural-urban divide doesn't widen. Investments in education and retraining for future industries will be critical to maintaining competitiveness. Ireland's cultural and linguistic identity may evolve as global interconnectedness grows. While maintaining its rich cultural heritage, Ireland is likely to continue being a key player in international organizations like the UN and EU, and it could increasingly serve as a mediator in global conflicts, building on its historical role as a neutral nation. With pressures from an aging population and rising costs, Ireland will need to rethink healthcare delivery. Technology could play a crucial role here. AI, telemedicine, and advancements in medical science could help alleviate these pressures, but significant investment in public health infrastructure will be needed. Ireland's future, while filled with challenges such as climate adaptation, population shifts, and economic diversification, also holds great promise. By investing in sustainability, education, and healthcare, while embracing its global role and technological innovation, Ireland could be well positioned for the next 100 years. The key will be balancing modern advancements with social equity and environmental sustainability.
That sounds great. What impact can the average person have on Ireland's future?
The average Irish person can have a significant impact on the future of the country, both individually and collectively. By voting, participating in public discourse, and holding representatives accountable, citizens can shape policies on critical issues such as housing, healthcare, and social justice. Supporting grassroots movements and engaging in local councils or civic groups also ensures that community voices are heard in decision-making processes. Spending money locally helps stimulate growth, create jobs, and ensure economic stability, especially in rural areas. By supporting local businesses, Irish people can contribute to a more resilient and diverse economy. Advocating for fair wages and ethical practices also helps shape a more equitable society. The average person can have a significant role in promoting inclusivity and equality by standing up against discrimination, supporting human rights, and fostering a culture of kindness and openness. Volunteering with charities, community organizations, or advocacy groups helps address social issues like homelessness, mental health, and integration of immigrants. Encouraging education and lifelong learning can foster a more skilled and adaptable workforce. The average person can support this by investing in personal development or advocating for better education systems. Engaging in digital literacy, STEM fields, and creative industries ensures Ireland continues to be competitive globally. By celebrating and promoting Irish culture, language, and arts, individuals can maintain Ireland's unique cultural identity while embracing global diversity. Participating in cultural events, supporting Irish artists, and promoting the Irish language helps keep the nation's heritage alive. The cumulative impact of these individual actions helps Ireland move towards a future that is more sustainable, equitable, and inclusive, ensuring that the country thrives in the next century.
One of the areas where we lack trust is discrimination of immigrants.
Immigration is one area where trust and discrimination have been significant issues in Ireland. Historically, Ireland was a nation of emigration, but in recent decades, it has become a destination for immigrants, which has led to challenges in integrating new populations. This shift has sometimes resulted in mistrust or xenophobic attitudes toward immigrants, particularly around fears about job security, housing, and the strain on public services. Many Irish citizens express concerns that immigration is poorly managed or that the system is overwhelmed, leading to tensions over resources such as housing and healthcare. These fears can be stoked by misinformation or populist rhetoric, contributing to the view that immigrants are somehow taking resources from locals. Immigrants, particularly those from non-EU countries or ethnic minorities, often face racism and discrimination in housing, employment, and social interactions. This has been highlighted in several reports from the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission, noting that structural barriers can make it more difficult for immigrants to access equal opportunities. Misinformation in the media and political discourse can also contribute to negative perceptions of immigrants. By focusing on isolated negative incidents or framing immigration as a crisis, the media can reinforce stereotypes and heighten mistrust. This undermines the contributions immigrants make to Irish society, economically, socially, and culturally. Building trust requires transparent and fair immigration policies, open public dialogue, and active efforts to combat discrimination. Education campaigns that highlight the benefits of immigration and efforts to integrate immigrants into Irish society through language programs, job training, etc., are essential. Communities that foster inclusivity and celebrate diversity can help break down barriers and reduce mistrust. Ireland's future as a growing and diverse nation will depend on addressing these issues with fairness and compassion, ensuring that everyone, regardless of origin, has a role to play in society.
It seems like the communities where immigrants are placed are those who are facing the biggest economic challenges, those communities that are less supported by government.
Immigrants are frequently placed in areas that already face issues like unemployment, inadequate housing, and underfunded services. This can create tension, as both the local population and new arrivals are competing for the same limited resources. Working-class communities often bear the brunt of both economic challenges and the pressures associated with immigration. The placement of immigrants and asylum seekers in direct provision centers or lower-income areas is often due to the availability of cheaper housing or state-owned properties, rather than a strategic effort to integrate immigrants into more affluent or balanced communities. This can exacerbate existing social and economic problems in these areas, which are already struggling with unemployment, poor infrastructure, and a lack of investment. In these working-class communities, residents often feel neglected by the government, leading to resentment when additional resources are allocated to support immigrants or refugees. This sense of neglect can create an us versus them mentality, where longtime residents feel that their own needs are being overlooked in favor of newcomers. This dynamic can foster mistrust and fuel discrimination, as immigrants are seen as contributing to already stretched services. Economic challenges like a housing crisis, limited healthcare access, and job insecurity contribute to the perception that immigrants are taking opportunities away from local residents. In reality, the root issue is often government underinvestment in these communities, which creates a false competition between locals and immigrants for basic services. To address this, the government must not only invest in immigrant integration, but also in the working-class communities where they are placed. This means improving housing, education, and employment opportunities for everyone, which could help ease tensions and build a more inclusive society. Fostering dialogue and collaboration between immigrant and local communities can help bridge divides and dispel myths about immigration. A long-term solution would involve better distribution of immigrants across all parts of society, including middle and upper-class areas, so that the pressures of integration aren't concentrated in already struggling neighborhoods. Ensuring that communities feel supported rather than left behind is key to reducing mistrust and discrimination.
While we're speaking about truth and trust, what is the truth about immigration?
Immigration brings both challenges and opportunities. While it can strain resources in the short term, immigrants tend to contribute positively to the economy and enrich the cultural fabric of society. The truth about immigration is multifaceted and often more nuanced than what is portrayed in political discourse or the media. In Ireland, immigrants help fill labor shortages in sectors like healthcare, hospitality, agriculture, and technology. Overall, immigrants contribute more in taxes than they receive in benefits, and they often take on jobs that locals are unwilling or unable to fill. Immigration enriches cultural diversity and brings new ideas, skills, and perspectives. In a globalized world, this diversity can foster creativity and innovation, benefiting society as a whole. Many tech companies and startups in Ireland are driven by a multicultural workforce, which enhances competitiveness and fosters international connections. It's true that rapid immigration can put pressure on public services like housing, healthcare, and education, especially if these services are already underfunded or overstretched. However, this is often more a reflection of government policy and underinvestment than of immigration itself. Better planning and investment can help ensure that both immigrant and local populations have access to adequate services. Immigration can create challenges in terms of integration, particularly if immigrant communities feel isolated or if local communities feel they are not receiving adequate support. Integration policies that promote inclusion, language learning, and equal access to opportunities can lead to positive outcomes for both immigrants and locals. Immigration is often a politically charged issue, and misinformation or fear-mongering can distort public perception. Immigrants are sometimes scapegoated for economic issues like unemployment or housing shortages, even when the real causes are more complex and tied to broader economic policies. Anti-immigrant sentiment often stems from fear of the unknown or from competition for limited resources. Ensuring the success of immigration requires thoughtful policy, adequate investment, and a focus on integration and equality for all residents. In the long run, immigrants tend to benefit host societies economically, socially, and culturally.
Can you give me a brief summary of Ireland's emigration?
Ireland has a long history of emigration, largely shaped by economic conditions, political unrest, and social hardship. The most significant wave of emigration occurred during the Great Famine, and Gortamor. Over 1 million people left Ireland, primarily for the United States, Canada, and Britain. The famine devastated Ireland, causing widespread death and poverty, and forced many to seek better opportunities abroad. Emigration continued after the famine, as economic recovery was slow. Many Irish people left for the same destinations, with the United States becoming a key destination for Irish immigrants, and emigration was seen as a solution to poverty and land shortages. During the early 1900s, emigration slowed somewhat due to political changes like the Irish War of Independence and the establishment of the Irish Free State in 1922. However, economic hardship continued to drive people abroad, especially during the Great Depression in the 1930s. After World War II, Ireland experienced more waves of emigration as the country struggled economically. The 1950s, in particular, saw high levels of emigration, with many Irish going to Britain in search of work. The period of rapid economic growth in the 1990s and early 2000s saw a reversal of emigration trends. For the first time, Ireland became a destination for immigrants, and many Irish people who had left returned. After the global financial crash in 2008, Ireland faced another wave of emigration, especially among younger people. High unemployment and austerity measures forced many to seek jobs abroad, primarily in countries like Australia, Canada, and the UK. Throughout its history, Ireland's emigration patterns have been closely tied to its economic fortunes and social challenges, with each wave of emigration leaving a lasting impact on the Irish diaspora worldwide. Today, the country continues to grapple with the legacies of these historical migrations. Currently, immigration into Ireland is at a 17-year high. In the 12 months leading up to April 2024, 149,200 people immigrated to Ireland, contributing to the largest annual population increase since 2008. Of these immigrants, 30,000 were returning Irish citizens, 27,000 were other EU citizens, and 86,800 were from outside the EU, including many Ukrainians. This period also saw a notable rise in emigration, with 69,900 people leaving the country, the highest since 2015. While Ireland's population has been growing, there are concerns about the strain on housing and public services, as immigration increases alongside an already stressed housing market and healthcare system.
So we have a long relationship with emigration. How many Irish people are there in the world? How many people in the world claim to be Irish?
The current Irish diaspora is estimated to include around 70 million people of Irish descent worldwide, with significant populations in countries like the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia. Of those, 1.47 million are Irish-born immigrants living abroad, and approximately 3 million hold Irish citizenship through descent or naturalization. The Irish diaspora is a key part of Ireland's global identity, with many second and third generation descendants maintaining strong cultural ties to Ireland. This vast global network plays an important role in Irish culture, economy, and diplomacy, particularly through remittances, tourism, and international influence. It's estimated that around 10,000 to 15,000 Irish people are living in the U.S. as undocumented or illegal immigrants. The number varies by source, with some suggesting it could be higher, particularly in cities like Boston or New York. Despite ongoing efforts to regularize their status without significant immigration reform, many Irish immigrants continue to live in uncertain conditions abroad.
What role in Ireland do social media companies have on the negative perception of immigrants?
Social media companies in Ireland have played a significant role in shaping negative perceptions of immigrants by allowing the rapid spread of misinformation, xenophobic rhetoric, and sensationalized content. Algorithms on platforms like Facebook and Twitter often amplify divisive or emotionally charged posts, which can escalate fears around immigration. False or misleading stories about immigrants draining resources or causing social problems can fuel distrust and hostility. Without strict moderation or fact-checking, these narratives spread quickly, reinforcing stereotypes and deepening divisions in society.
You mentioned xenophobia. What is xenophobia?
Xenophobia is the fear, dislike, or prejudice against people from other countries or cultures. It often manifests as hostility toward immigrants or foreigners, fueled by the perception that they pose a threat to the local culture, economy, or security. Xenophobia can lead to discrimination, exclusion, and violence against individuals simply because of their nationality, race, or ethnic background. It's typically driven by fear of the unknown, misinformation, and a lack of understanding or empathy toward different cultures and communities.
Could you suggest a solution to the negative perception of immigrants?
Social media platforms should increase efforts to monitor and remove harmful or misleading content related to immigration. This includes flagging false claims, hate speech, and xenophobic content while promoting fact-based information. Governments, NGOs, and media outlets could collaborate to share stories that highlight the positive contributions of immigrants, countering negative stereotypes with real-life examples of integration and success. Educating the public on how to identify misinformation and critically evaluate sources would empower individuals to question xenophobic content and prevent its spread. Encouraging people to engage in constructive discussions on immigration can also help shift the narrative. The Irish government could work with platforms like Facebook and Twitter to ensure that harmful content related to immigration is quickly addressed. Social media companies should be held accountable for the content they promote through their algorithms. These combined efforts would help mitigate the spread of misinformation and improve the public's understanding of immigration, promoting a more informed and inclusive discourse.
What would be the motivation to spread misinformation about immigrants, and who would benefit from that?
The motivation to spread misinformation about immigration often stems from political or ideological agendas, fear-mongering, and a desire to manipulate public opinion. Politicians or political groups may use anti-immigrant rhetoric to rally support by tapping into economic anxieties, resource scarcity, or cultural identity fears. Extremist groups or populist movements can also exploit these sentiments to create division or gain influence. Additionally, some media outlets or social media users may amplify these narratives for clicks, engagement, or ad revenue, benefiting from the emotional reactions misinformation generates. Politicians, especially populist or far-right groups, often use anti-immigrant rhetoric to appeal to voters' fears and gain political support by scapegoating immigrants for economic issues or cultural shifts. Sensationalized stories about immigration can attract more readers or viewers, increasing engagement and ad revenue. Xenophobic or nationalist groups use misinformation to foster division and promote their ideology, aiming to gain influence or recruit followers. Misinformation can inflame emotions, making these groups' messages more potent and widespread.
Isn't there some kind of irony with Irish people being xenophobic?
Yes, given Ireland's long history of emigration. Millions of Irish people left the country over the last 2 centuries, particularly during the Great Famine, seeking better lives in the US, UK, and elsewhere. Many of these immigrants faced discrimination, xenophobia, and hostility in their new countries. Given that history, it's paradoxical for modern Irish society to harbor similar prejudices against immigrants today, as Ireland has become a destination for many seeking refuge or economic opportunity.
Have you heard of the phrase, no blacks, no dogs, no Irish?
The phrase serves as a reminder of the deep-seated discrimination faced by the Irish, which adds to the irony when xenophobia surfaces within Ireland today. The phrase, no blacks, no dogs, no Irish, refers to signs commonly seen in Britain during the mid-20th century, particularly in the 1950s and 1960s. These signs symbolize discrimination against Irish immigrants, black people, and even pets, reflecting widespread prejudice and xenophobia. Irish immigrants, like many others, faced significant hostility, exclusion, and stereotyping in Britain.
What would your response be to the phrase, undocumented illegal men are attacking our women and children?
The phrase you mentioned is a harmful and xenophobic stereotype that plays on fear rather than fact. It falsely frames immigrants, especially undocumented ones, as inherently violent or dangerous, perpetuating fear and hatred. In reality, studies have shown that immigrants, including undocumented ones, are no more likely to commit crimes than the general population. These kinds of statements are often used to stoke division and justify anti-immigrant policies or sentiments. It's crucial to challenge such narratives with facts and empathy.
What other phrases are used to stoke anti-immigration division?
Some common ones include, they're taking our jobs, used to portray immigrants as economic threats. Invasion, referring to immigration as if it's a hostile takeover. They're draining the system, implying immigrants overburden healthcare, education, or welfare systems. They don't assimilate, suggesting immigrants resist integrating into society. Criminal aliens, to unfairly link immigrants with crime. These phrases perpetuate xenophobia and reinforce negative perceptions of immigrants.
Would it be similar to the demonization of working class people and relating working class people to crimes being committed?
Just as immigrants are unfairly stereotyped as threats, working class people are often depicted as inherently linked to criminality or undesirable behavior. These narratives serve to divide society by portraying certain groups as problematic, reinforcing negative stereotypes, and justifying social and economic inequality. Both cases rely on simplistic and harmful generalizations that obscure the real, often systemic causes of crime and poverty.
What are other harmful stereotypes about working class people?
Working class individuals are often unfairly labeled as lazy or lacking ambition, despite many working long hours in difficult jobs. There's a harmful stereotype that working class people are less educated or less intelligent, which ignores the systemic barriers to education and opportunities. Like immigrants, working class communities are often unfairly associated with crime or antisocial behavior. They're sometimes seen as overly reliant on welfare or state support, which overlooks the economic challenges many face. These stereotypes oversimplify and stigmatize individuals based on their economic status.
What would be the relationship between middle and upper class people and crime?
The relationship between middle and upper class people and crime often involves less visible but equally impactful forms of crime, such as white-collar crimes, fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion, or corporate misconduct. These crimes can have large-scale economic and social impacts, but they tend to be less scrutinized or punished compared to street-level crimes typically associated with working-class communities. Wealthier individuals may have access to better legal representation, which can lead to fewer convictions or lighter sentences, contributing to perceptions of inequality in the justice system.
Why would they be less scrutinised and punished? What would be the motivation behind that?
Wealthier individuals can afford top-tier legal representation, which can lead to lighter sentences or fewer convictions. Individuals in higher socioeconomic positions often have connections or influence that can shield them from harsher legal consequences. White-collar crimes don't always produce immediate or visible harm, making them harder to prosecute and less likely to attract public outrage than violent or street-level crimes.
In your opinion, which of the two types of crime, white collar crime or street level crime, have a bigger impact on society?
Crimes like fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion can destabilize economies, erode public trust, and cause significant financial losses for individuals and governments. These crimes often involve systemic corruption and large sums of money, making their effects far-reaching. White-collar crime typically has a larger long-term impact on society than street-level crime. In contrast, street-level crimes, while more visible and directly impactful, e.g., theft or assault, tend to have less widespread economic consequences. However, both types of crime can be deeply damaging in different ways.
Do you have any notable examples in Ireland of big white collar crime? And maybe estimate the total cost per year of white collar crime?
It's difficult to pinpoint exact figures, but estimates suggest that white-collar crime, particularly through fraud, corruption, and tax evasion, can cost Ireland billions each year. For example, the banking crisis alone cost taxpayers upwards of 64 billion euros. Key executives at Anglo-Irish Bank were involved in fraudulent activities, such as hiding large loans and manipulating the bank's balance sheets, leading to the bank's collapse. This contributed to Ireland's banking crisis, costing taxpayers billions in bailouts. By comparison, theft or assault costs the state less, though still significant in terms of law enforcement and incarceration costs. White-collar crime tends to have a larger economic impact due to its scale and systemic nature, affecting industries, public finances, and economic stability.
Is there a relationship between the scapegoating of immigrants and the scapegoating of working class people?
Yes, there's a clear similarity between the scapegoating of immigrants and working class people. Both groups are often unfairly blamed for societal problems like unemployment, crime, and resource shortages. This scapegoating diverts attention away from systemic issues, such as economic inequality or governmental mismanagement. In both cases, powerful narratives are created to fuel division, portraying immigrants and working-class people as threats to the broader society. This tactic is frequently used to protect the interests of the elite, while marginalizing vulnerable groups.
Could you suggest a solution to this?
A possible solution to both the scapegoating of immigrants and working-class people is to address the systemic issues that fuel division, such as inequality, lack of opportunity, and underinvestment in services. By focusing on economic reforms, access to education, and ensuring adequate resources for all communities, the root causes of these societal problems can be tackled, reducing the need for scapegoating. Promoting inclusive narratives that emphasize shared challenges and fostering solidarity across social groups can also counter harmful stereotypes and unite people toward common goals.
So are you suggesting solidarity between immigrants and working class people?
Both groups often face similar challenges, such as economic inequality, underfunded public services, and exploitation by those in power. Solidarity between working class people and immigrants can emerge through shared struggles and common goals. By recognizing these shared experiences, they can unite to advocate for better working conditions, affordable housing, and fair access to healthcare and education. Joint movements, community organizing, and labor unions can help build bridges between these groups, fostering mutual support and challenging systems that perpetuate inequality and division.
Yeah, but surely there'll be some groups that might have a problem with that.
Groups that might be averse to solidarity between working class people and immigrants include political elites and populist parties. They may benefit from dividing these groups to maintain control and avoid addressing systemic issues. Corporations and employers. Some may exploit both immigrants and working-class people for cheap labor, and solidarity could lead to demands for better wages and conditions. Certain media outlets may perpetuate divisive narratives to stoke fear and gain viewership through sensationalized stories about immigration and working-class issues. These groups often use division to deflect attention from broader structural problems. Far-right and nationalist groups often push anti-immigrant rhetoric, stoking division based on cultural or racial differences. Landlords and property developers. They might oppose solidarity if it leads to stronger demands for affordable housing, rent control, or better tenant rights, which could impact their profits. Some think tanks or advocacy groups promote policies that benefit the elite by framing immigrants or working class people as the cause of economic challenges rather than systemic issues. These groups often have a vested interest in maintaining divisions for economic or ideological gain. In Ireland, Irish Business and Employers Confederation represents Irish businesses and often lobbies for pro-business policies that may not always align with working class or immigrant concerns. The Economic and Social Research Institute can influence policy which some argue can be tilted toward elite interests. The Irish Tax Institute focuses on tax policy, often advocating for lower taxes for corporations and high earners. These groups can shape policies that impact both working class people and immigrants.
It sounds like there's a relationship between politics and economics. Could you suggest some kind of political economies training for working class people and immigrants?
A political economy training course for working class people and immigrants could cover the following key areas: Introduction to Political Economy, overview of the relationship between politics and economics, focusing on how decisions about resources, power, and wealth impact different social classes. Understanding economic systems, explanation of capitalism, socialism, and mixed economies, and how these systems shape labor, markets, and class dynamics. Labor rights and workers' movements, historical and contemporary look at labor movements, trade unions, and worker rights. Globalization and immigration, exploring how global economic policies affect immigration and the working class. Policy making and advocacy, training on how to engage in advocacy, influence policy decisions, and participate in community organizing to protect labor and immigrant rights. Critical media literacy, how to navigate and critically assess information, including media portrayals of economic issues and immigration. Sessions on financial literacy, understanding tax systems, and accessing public services. This course would aim to empower participants with knowledge and tools to engage in political and economic systems, advocate for their rights, and build solidarity across different communities.
Are there any other groups in Ireland, like immigrants or working class people, that would get scapegoated?
Yes, travelers. The Irish traveler community has historically faced significant discrimination, being stereotyped as troublemakers or unfairly blamed for societal issues. LGBTQ+ community. While progress has been made in terms of rights, LGBTQ+ individuals still face prejudice, especially in more conservative areas. People experiencing homelessness. Homeless individuals are often stigmatized or blamed for their situation. With limited understanding of the systemic issues, like housing shortages, that contribute to homelessness. These groups are often unfairly targeted in public discourse, much like immigrants and working class people.
Sometimes I think that there's an irony at play when you have Gardaí who aren't really well paid, but they spend a lot of their time investigating or arresting working class people.
It's true that the Garda, Irish police, often face challenges related to low pay and difficult working conditions. As a result, their resources are limited, which can influence how crime is prioritized. White-collar crime, being complex and often requiring extensive investigation, may not receive the same focus as more visible, street-level crimes associated with the working class. Additionally, the legal and financial influence of those involved in white-collar crime can create barriers to prosecution, while working-class crime is often easier to target and more publicly visible.
So is policing about perception and visibility?
Policing can certainly be influenced by public perception. In many cases, law enforcement agencies are under pressure to address visible, street-level crime because it directly impacts public safety and community concerns. Crimes like theft, vandalism, or drug-related offenses are often prioritized because they are more immediate and noticeable to the public. White-collar crime, on the other hand, tends to be less visible and more complex, requiring longer investigations that don't always garner the same public attention. As a result, policing often reflects the concerns of what is most visibly troubling to society.
But let's take drugs, for example. Would there be a higher use of drugs in middle and upper class communities?
Yes, research and reports often indicate that drug use, particularly recreational use of substances like cocaine or prescription drugs, can be higher in middle and upper class communities. However, these groups are less likely to face arrest or public scrutiny compared to working class communities. This disparity can be attributed to factors like social privilege, access to private settings for drug use, and the ability to afford legal defenses, which often shield wealthier individuals from law enforcement attention. Public perception and policing tend to focus more on visible drug use in lower income areas.
Is this another example of scapegoating?
Yes, this can be seen as a form of scapegoating. By focusing law enforcement efforts on drug use in working class communities, while largely ignoring or minimizing the drug use that occurs in middle and upper class communities, a perception is created that drug-related issues are mainly a working class problem. This reinforces negative stereotypes about working class people, while deflecting attention from the broader societal issue of drug use across all economic groups. It serves to marginalize and criminalize certain communities more heavily than others.
What are the long-term implications or effects of white-collar crime on society?
Economic crimes like fraud, embezzlement, or corporate corruption can destabilize financial institutions, resulting in economic crises, job losses, and reduced public services. This can lead to increased poverty and social instability, indirectly contributing to higher crime rates and reduced community safety. White-collar crimes like environmental violations or unsafe business practices can directly harm public health, leading to long-term health risks and safety concerns. The cumulative impact of white-collar crime can undermine societal trust and security.
So what's more serious, white-collar crime or working-class crime?
White-collar crime is often considered more serious because of the far-reaching economic consequences, which can destabilize economies, lead to job losses, and erode public trust. However, working-class crime, particularly related to drugs or theft, tends to be more visible and carries a direct, immediate impact on communities in terms of safety and social cohesion. While both are serious, the hidden nature and broader impact of white-collar crime can make it more damaging on a large scale.
I've often thought there was a relationship between the hoarding of land and properties to drive prices up and how drug dealers drive prices up. And it creates the perception that there's a lack of resources and everyone scrambles. But really, there's no lack of resources, there's no lack of drugs, there's no lack of properties. It's just part of the game. If you control supply, you can increase demand and increase the prices.
There is a similarity between landlords hoarding properties and drug dealers increasing drug prices, as both practices involve controlling supply to inflate demand and prices. Landlords who hoard properties create artificial scarcity in the housing market, driving up rent or property prices, making housing less affordable for many. Similarly, drug dealers can limit supply to increase the street price of drugs, taking advantage of desperation and demand. In both cases, individuals exploit market dynamics for personal profit at the expense of broader societal well-being.
Are there any other examples of this in the business world, in the white-collar world?
Price fixing. Companies in the same industry collude to set prices higher than they would be in a competitive market. This is common in sectors like energy or pharmaceuticals. Stock manipulation. Individuals or groups artificially inflate stock prices by creating demand or spreading misleading information, only to sell at the peak, leaving investors with overpriced assets. Monopolistic practices. Companies may buy out competitors or limit production to control supply and drive up prices, seen in tech giants or essential commodities like oil. These practices exploit market dynamics for profit, often at the expense of consumers or smaller businesses.
But we don't see people who carry out those practices as the villain. Why are we only presented with one villain, the drug dealer? Like, I understand that they get involved in violence, in intimidation, in crime, in importation, but surely the effects of corporate crime in Ireland is massive. But we never hear of people in that world going to prison, getting arrested, being villainised.
Drug dealers are often portrayed as villains because their activities are associated with visible crime, addiction, and social harm. The illegal nature of drug dealing, combined with its direct impact on public health and safety, makes it easier for society to target and vilify individuals involved in the drug trade. Meanwhile, similar exploitative behaviors in the business world, such as price fixing or monopolistic practices, are more hidden and often operate within legal frameworks, which can obscure their harmful impact and make them less scrutinized or demonized in the same way.
So it's back to perception, optics, what it looks like, and not really about the truth.
Yes, it's largely about perception and optics. Drug dealers are seen as villains due to the immediate visible harm associated with drug-related crimes, such as violence, addiction, and community destabilization. The illegal nature of their activities makes them easier targets for public outrage and law enforcement. In contrast, harmful practices in the corporate or white-collar world often operate within legal frameworks or behind closed doors, making them less visible and less likely to be vilified, even though their impact can be equally or more damaging in the long run.
So that kind of brings us back full circle to trust and the truth.
Truth is often obscured by perception, optics, and the narratives that society creates. Whether it's the vilification of drug dealers while white-collar crime is overlooked, or how immigration and working-class people are scapegoated, the truth becomes distorted based on what is visible, what is easy to blame, and what those in power choose to highlight. Recognizing this disconnect between perception and reality is key to understanding deeper systemic issues and promoting fairness.
In Ireland, I remember Leo Varadkar came up with a phrase, welfare cheats, cheat us all. What do you think about that phrase in light of what we've just been talking about?
The phrase, welfare cheats, cheat us all, is a polarizing one. On one hand, it seeks to highlight the misuse of public funds by individuals who exploit the welfare system. However, it can also stigmatize those who genuinely rely on welfare support, implying widespread dishonesty within the system, which is often not the case. This kind of rhetoric can shift focus away from larger issues, like corporate tax evasion or systemic inequality, which arguably have far greater financial impacts on society than welfare fraud. It risks reinforcing harmful stereotypes and diverting attention from more significant forms of exploitation.
And then there's the obvious recent case of the 14 billion euro in taxes that Apple didn't want to pay and the Irish government didn't want them to pay.
As of September 10th, 2024, the European Court of Justice, ECJ, has ruled that Apple must pay the 13 billion euros in back taxes to Ireland. The court confirmed that Apple received unlawful state aid from Ireland through preferential tax arrangements, a practice deemed illegal by EU regulations. This ruling overturns earlier decisions in favor of Apple and now requires the Irish government to recover the unpaid taxes, marking a significant moment in the EU's fight against tax avoidance by multinational corporations.
14 billion fucking euro. 14 billion. Not 14 grand or 140 grand or 14 million. 14 billion. Think about it. That's equivalent to all the money or all the theft and crime by all working class people, all put together for the last 100 years of this state. And that was by one company. 14 billion euro. Get the fuck. Now that's the fucking truth. Trust me on that one. This is Ireland.
In this episode, we explored the ways in which perception distorts the truth about crime and power. We examined the vilification of drug dealers versus the lesser scrutiny of white-collar criminals, despite similar exploitative behaviors. We also discussed the scapegoating of immigrants and working-class communities, highlighting how systemic issues are often deflected onto vulnerable groups. When working-class people and immigrants are in conflict, those in positions of power, such as political elites, corporations, and interest groups, often benefit. This division distracts from systemic issues like economic inequality, underfunded public services, and exploitation. By keeping these groups focused on each other as perceived competitors for jobs, housing, and resources, those in power can maintain control, avoid accountability, and deflect attention from the larger systemic problems that affect both groups. Division weakens potential solidarity that could drive meaningful social change. Ultimately, we return to the central theme of truth, questioning how society shapes narratives that obscure reality and serve certain interests. As we close this episode, we've uncovered how optics, perception, and power dynamics can distort the truth about crime, scapegoating, and inequality. By understanding these mechanisms, we can begin to question the narratives that shape our views and foster a more just and informed society. Thanks for joining us in this conversation, and stay tuned for our next episode, where we'll continue to explore challenging ideas that shape our world.
Ehi compare, ci può suonare, chi si suona la trombona, ma come si suona la trombona, a fumma la trombona, pa 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 pa, la trombetta, zinga zingu, violina, plinga pling, un mandolin, tu 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 tu, un saxofone, un friscalette, tippiti tippiti ta. Tippity tippity, tippity tippity top.